Yeah. Well,
I like it. Hi, Alex.
hey.
Well, we were just, there's like the show before the show.
Oh, yeah. No one's
That's what we were just
that.
doing. We were just doing the show before the show. And you were
Right.
about to say something so important that I was like, this isn't fair.
I'm
everybody
glad you started recording. The thing that I hate is when I like start talking to an interviewer and they're like talking and I assume they're recording and then they're like, oh, you should have said that. I'm like,
right. And then they try to recreate it. And I'm not here to do that. I'm here for authenticity. It's my love language.
I'm glad you stopped me from saying anything interesting.
Well, it was very interesting what you were about to say, because I was asking you, because we're just meeting, even though we have a common friend. And I said, do you know what the podcast is about? And you said you did. And I said, well, I think your book, The Upward Spiral, has so much to do with diet culture that it makes my head want to explode with excitement to talk to you today. And then you were going to say something. Do you remember?
Yes, that, I agree. When I first heard about your podcast, I totally saw like the overlap, even though we're coming from totally different areas. But the other thing that made me excited to go on your podcast is I have this secret like passion that I love to talk about, which is about like, diet and nutrition and how we sort of like think about it totally the wrong way. And what really got me into that,
welcome home.
What really got me into that originally was now I'm blanking on the author, but The Omnivore's Dilemma. And then his follow-up about now I'm food rules. I can't remember, but like basically the gist was like eat real food, mostly plants, not too much.
Yep.
And I was like, oh, okay, that's genius. And then I have another friend that fueled this passion. This would be its whole other podcast.
We might be doing multiples. I just want to put that out there.
He sent me a video about,
just to make you feel better about life. It's Michael Pollan.
Yes, thank you.
Getting older is difficult.
Thank you.
And I just had to Google it really quickly. I wasn't going to be able to be present in this interview until I remembered Michael Pollan's name.
I appreciate it. I was very proud of myself for actually just moving past it.
Wow. It's very much a part of your book, what you just did. You just did your own coping skills.
Yeah, it's hard. Actually, by the way, writing a book about well-being is really challenging because like anytime you're facing some challenge and then eventually you get over it, you're like, oh, right. I wrote about that in chapter 8. I probably should have remembered that like 2 days ago.
I hear you on that. Yes.
It just adds to your self-criticism.
It sure does.
Not allowed.
Like, why are you beating yourself up? You just wrote a whole chapter on not beating yourself up when you make mistakes, Molly.
Exactly.
Being human is tricky.
Exactly. It's much easier to tell your friends what they should do or your wife what she should do.
Absolutely.
But yes, getting back to my passion for sugar, I watched this video. I can't remember who the lecturer was, but about how like fructose is a poison.
Yes, it's alcohol without the buzz. It is the most toxic thing for your liver. I could talk about fruit juice all day.
And I was like, oh, because it's like, and it was like, what I love about it is one of the things that I love about science and pop culture. And like when some people harp on an idea that's like totally wrong and unhelpful and unhealthy, it's almost always like based in some like truth, like some scientific truth or fact or study like that they misinterpreted. And that's what like I found so fascinating.
Yeah, welcome to the world.
I was like, wait, how can fructose, because originally I was like, wait, but how can fructose be a poison? And his point was, what do we call substances that because like glucose can be processed by any cell in your body.
Yep.
he's like, fructose can only be processed by the liver.
Yep.
He's like, what do we call chemicals that can only be processed by the liver? Oh, they're poison. Like, that's what alcohol
Mhm.
is. And I was like, wait, but fruit has
Isn't it amazing?
fructose.
Halo Foods impressed me to the end of time. Halo Foods impressed me. And can you imagine being in my inner circle and having children? I say to my best friend, "Would you want me to get him beer instead at the market instead of orange juice? What is that?"
We have friends. I have several friends who are doctors, and I'm often surprised at the snacks that they give their kids. And I realize like that's such a challenge to actually like, and so much hard work to actually know what is healthy. That like,
well, I think you bring societal, and then you got to battle with a 5-year-old, which
right
is its own problem.
Well, but there's your there's the battle with the child. There's like the marketing that is towards the child. There's the the marketing is targeted to you.
Oh, sure.
About how like, well, this seems healthy. It says,
or just the treat of it all. I mean, we're like the same age. How do you feel about Dunkaroos? I just get the greatest feeling when I think of Dunkaroos. And they're probably the most toxic food on the face of the earth.
Yeah, I think I have an extremely positive
feeling. But that's what I mean.
I don't think I've ever had them.
I have. I'm lying.
But I think of my positive feeling because of these like advertisements from childhood and the fact that I was never allowed to have them.
Let's get into this book.
I think we already have. But
but deep into this book, there's so much to talk about because you're talking so much about depression and how to beat depression. But my first question is about like, how do you define depression?
Yeah. I mean, one of the things about the book that was difficult for me was like targeting it at like, or focusing on just depression. Because I actually think like it's much broader issue than that, because like in the brain, there's no like bright line that you
this is depression, like, this is anxiety, right?
Like that's why I went into grad school to study this stuff, because I was like, well, there's got to be something we could measure about the brain that you could diagnose people like, oh, you're depressed and you're not. And there isn't. There's no brain scan, no EEG or lab test that you can do to diagnose someone as having depression. Like, yes, there are certain tendencies of depressed brains or people who are at higher risk for depression, but it's not like a clear line that we can draw, like say diabetes. We're like, oh, your blood sugar is above this, you have
your A1C,
blood sugar is here, you're pre-diabetic. Like, so really, there's two ways that I think about depression. One is the sort of the diagnostic way that like psychiatrists and most of society thinks about, where there's this list of 9 symptoms, difficulty sleeping and like low mood.
And my favorite one is anhedonia, lack of interest and pleasure in life, which I think really links into diet culture. It's not I love it, but I think it is the essence of diet culture.
And interesting. Yeah. And so like there's this list of 9 symptoms. And if you have like 5 of them for more than 2 weeks, then like, yep, you got depression. And like, check.
We all are. We're recording this in 2022. So that's just about all of us. We all fit criteria today.
But like, I think the reason why that way of thinking about it is really unhelpful is because like, oh, if you meet those diagnoses, then people take like one of 2 paths, either like, oh, I'm broken, there's nothing I can do, or like, oh, I'm so glad I have depression, now I know what it is. And that like knowing what it is can be helpful, except like, then you need to know like, well, what can you do about it?
1000%.
And so there's sometimes helpful to be diagnosed with depression, but the question is like, okay, what are you going to do with that information?
Well,
And then the other side of it is just like, well, what if you don't quite meet the like technical criteria for depression? Some people are like, oh, okay, I don't need to do anything. I'm perfectly fine. And like, instead of thinking of it as this continuum,
right.
because that's like the brain doesn't make those distinctions. It's like our biology is all continuous, and there's a lot of overlap in the neurobiology between things like unhealthy eating patterns and unhealthy habits and anxiety and depression and insomnia. And we should, it's much more helpful to like think about those like broader, the broader context and the nuances, because that's much more about our lived experience. And what most of us want is to like, oh, be happier and calmer and more
and
productive.
heal.
And it's not useful to think about like, oh, diagnosis, there's something wrong with you. They're like, oh, no, there's nothing wrong with you. You're totally fine.
Well, and also in the spirit of diet culture, I think, at least in my own personal experience of depression and anxiety, it's not like bippity boppity healed. It's sort of like there's times that accelerates, there's times it decelerates, there's times, and I think to not be focusing on these beautiful, part of the solution stuff and part of there's a lot of awareness in your book. And I love to talk about negativity bias because I think that is a big part of diet culture also. But it's like, I think even with eating disorder, people say, how do you know if I have an eating disorder? And I'm like, listen, I don't know that we need to say you have an eating disorder. If you feel like you have an unhealthy relationship with food, like, let's just work on that. Like, we don't necessarily need to be checking. Sometimes we do, but I think if you're feeling like, oh, wow, I do feel like I go down a downward spiral sometimes. And I think, Alex has a lot to teach us.
Yeah. And like that's again, coming to like the definition of like, oh, depression, people are like, well, am I depressed or not? Like, it doesn't, in some sense, matter, like whether you meet those technical definitions. Like, if I told you where you were depressed, would that help you treat yourself with more compassion? If so, then great.
Yes, you are
treating yourself
right
with more compassion. Like, if I told you had an eating disorder, would you suddenly go easier on yourself?
Right.
Or would you use it as an excuse to be more critical of yourself? Well, okay, well, like that's the important part.
Absolutely.
So like, let's not focus on the diagnosis. But so the way that I like to think about depression and how it relates to sort of these broader terms is it's a problem with the way with various circuits in the brain and how they're communicating and regulating each other. And it's a problem really with the way the thinking and feeling and habit and reward circuits are communicating with and regulating each other. But that sort of description also is much broader than just depression and encompasses anxiety and, a lot of disordered eating and other issues.
So can you talk us through a little bit of the brain? I just love to talk about the limbic system because I think it's just so important, because I think that's where people go wrong with, with dieting, is that they don't bring in the limbic system. And so they're just sort of on this diet and they never have any heart and soul and emotion and feeling into it. And that's why one of the main reasons it doesn't stick.
Right. Or rather, I would say, so the limbic system just relates to what I
love
was
when I have
saying.
neuroscientists, because I'm not so smart about this. And I just can't wait to hear you describe it to us.
The way the limbic system relates to what I was just saying is like that I would call is the primary feeling circuits in the brain. And by the way, that like when you say they're not putting enough feeling into it, I would say, well, they're actually probably bringing too much feeling, the negative feeling that they're not aware of. And that is just automatically driving their habit circuits in a way that they're not, aware of or have control over.
I'm in love with that. So what you're saying is it's like, because I always talk about the why, right? The nuts. And what you're saying is that people are bringing such past experience, negative emotions, negative cognitions into their next relationship with food, that it's making it impossible for the behaviors to match the ones that they need to succeed.
Right. Exactly. Because one of the primary things I think that people should understand about the brain because they're always like, why do I do things that I don't want to do?
I mean, this is all people on my show want to know. Why am I doing things that I don't want to do? If you can answer that, I mean, you should host the show. Great.
Okay.
You can answer it.
Let's switch spots. I need a better microphone. The answer is that because your brain is complex and wants different things. So there's the prefrontal cortex, which is the thinking part of the brain. It's sort of the most newly evolved, advanced, higher level thinking part of the brain. It's basically the front third surface. I've conveniently gone bald over my prefrontal cortex to illustrate where it is. I have a very large prefrontal cortex.
That is so wonderful. You're like a walking whiteboard. Thank you for that.
There you go. And so that is involved in like planning and like willpower and like think about our long-term goals and what's important to us. And that is supposed to sort of like regulate our emotional circuitry, the limbic system, as well as our habits and our impulses, which are deeper regions, part of the striatum, which is sometimes called like the reptilian center. But the these parts of the brain want different things. So there's two key parts of the striatum, these like sort of deep old regions. One, the upper part, is like where our deepest, most ingrained habits live. And it just wants to do whatever we've done before. Like this was one of the first parts of the brain to evolve, because if you think about it, like staying alive for an animal is a very complex thing. One of the simplest ways to sort of like automate that is to just be like, well, just do whatever you did before. Like you're alive now, so just keep doing that.
So is that sort of to say that if you're, let's say 45 years old and you have been struggling with binge eating since you're 13, that binge eating is sort of part of that stratum that you're talking about? It's sort of the thing you've just, I call it the well-worn snow groove. I'm like,
yes, that is exactly how I describe it as well. That when you create habits, like, you start off in life, it's not like a totally blank field of snow, but like, just like in a hill of snow, like there are hills and valleys or places that you're more likely to ski down or whatever, but there's a specific path that you take. And each time you go down that path, it creates a stronger groove, which is which exists in the connections in this upper part of the striatum, this habit circuit. And it's not that you can't ever break out of that. It's just that, it takes a little bit of intervention from your prefrontal cortex, a little bit of thoughtfulness, but also it requires, changing maybe some of the emotions that you're feeling, or being aware of those emotions, or changing some of the triggers that you're getting, or changing how you're thinking about the situation or whatever. And it's, part of the reason you're stuck is because you've been practicing this your whole life, and it's very hard to get out of that because of this reciprocal relationship between your habit system and your emotional circuitry. So like oftentimes your habits are triggered by stress, particularly your deepest habits, like your coping habits. You start to experience stress, which is an activation of, the emotional circuitry in the brain and this whole cascade. And your habit circuit is like, I know what to do with that. Like we do what we always do.
Right.
And then
let's go binge. Let's go drink. Let's go shop.
Engages in some habit. And simply by engaging in your habits, it decreases stress. Temporarily. And what we call, so this is an interesting thing about the habit circuit in the brain, is it doesn't make a distinction between good habits and bad habits. We, like our higher order thinking, makes distinctions because that cares about the future.
Right.
We would call a good habit something that benefits us in the long term, and a bad habit, something that harms us in the long term. But the brain region that's actually involved in like compelling us to do our habits doesn't care about it. It only
just cares
cares about
familiarity,
repetition of what you've done before, and whether it benefits you in that moment.
Wow. We are up against a lot.
Yeah. And so any habit, and here's one of the things that I think can hopefully help people treat themselves with a bit of compassion.
I'd say a lot of compassion, but potato.
Well, it's just you start. You got to start.
Little. I know it's in the book. It's in the book. Little bits.
Which is that any habit that you have benefits you in some way.
Yep.
If it didn't benefit you, you would fairly quickly stop doing it. It's just that, like, have you ever had a light go out in your bathroom?
Yeah.
Like the first 10 times you walk into the bathroom, you flick the light switch, and like, you're like, oh, right, it's out. And then after, 5 days, you stop flicking it because it doesn't accomplish anything. So
would you say, because I always bring my sickest self to these conversations, my 325-pound miserable, angry self. And so here's what she's saying right now. She's like, you're telling me that eating sheet cakes benefits me. It's just making me miserable. So can you just tell her the truth?
Right. Because unfortunately, when a habit borders on addiction or gets into unhealthy habit range, you're no longer doing it because it's pleasurable or enjoyable. You are doing it simply because that is what you do to mitigate stress.
That defines addiction to a T.
And there's a perfect, one of my favorite studies to illustrate that, took people who had problems with drinking, and they took like problematic heavy drinkers. They didn't like diagnose them as alcoholism. They were just like, okay, people have problematic drinking, and people who are just like social drinkers, just enjoy drinking. And they stuck them inside an fMRI machine, and they showed them pictures of their favorite alcohol. And in the social drinkers, they had activation in the lower parts of the striatum, also called the nucleus accumbens, which is sort of like part of the reward and reinforcement circuitry in the brain. They get a little boost of dopamine to say like, yeah, do that again. Because if you're a social drinker, you see your favorite alcohol and you're like, oh, yeah, maybe I'll go to happy hour with my friends on Friday. That sounds fun. Like, oh, maybe I'll ask out that cute researcher for a drink. Like you have positive associations with it. But in the problematic drinkers, they didn't have activation in those reward regions. They had activation in these habit regions. And you can sort of very clearly like draw a line in the brain. Like the upper part is the habit region. And so they saw these pictures of alcohol and felt compelled to drink, even though there was no pleasure associated with it. And this shows that the reciprocal relationship between stress and habits is that seeing the alcohol and like not drinking the alcohol is stressful, which makes you want to drink alcohol. And if you don't do that habit, then your stress levels go up, which makes you more want to do the habit. And if any point you just sort of like give in, then it's even more pleasurable and you're reinforcing that habit.
Right. So this is why it's so hard to break a bad habit.
Yeah. And so some people could look at that and be like, oh, can't do anything. But like,
well, I think it gets anytime I have someone with a book like yours on the show, it does get to this point where I'm like, can I get better?
Yes.
But that's how your book is literally only how to get better. Like we need to move into the solutions after.
But I should say that like, just to add, because you mentioned the importance of compassion, that like just recognizing like, oh, this is hard.
It's a deal.
Because of how my brain is. And not just your brain. Like, this is how the human brain works. You are a human. So like, don't beat yourself up too much for like doing the things that
like being a human
do. Exactly.
So don't beat yourself up for being a human.
Yeah.
It's harder than it looks. And I'll tell you, I mean, you know, cause I am just like the queen of like hating diet culture. Like, and then in this particular one, which is very different than alcohol, is to say that then there is a mass of society saying, what's wrong with you? It should be so easy. Just stop eating. Just take my program. Just do it in 30 days. Like, that's the part I think that really brings the demoralization, because you're talking about, I want to really try to make sure we talk about negativity bias, but I feel much more compelled for you to tell me how I get out of the spiral. Cause I'm in it right now. I'm in the deep spiral with you. We need to
there's not
get into the upward spiral.
So it's not so much that the brain has a negativity bias. I actually, like, people always think that the brain has a negativity bias. And because that was said so much, I like tried to like, you know, put that in like one section of the book. And I'm like, just the one section that was like, it's not really that there's a negativity bias. It's really that like, humans are by nature optimistic. And when you are optimistic and think that things will turn out well, the negative information impacts you a lot more strongly.
Let's break that down, because that is, and then probably comes to sabotage you, it sounds like.
Yeah. So like
let's put that into like real terms.
Yeah. So one of the things that people notice when, like, you know, people are depressed, they're like, oh, you're just so like pessimistic.
Yeah, get over it.
I was like, oh, this diet's not going to work. Or like, oh, I could never exercise for that much or whatever. And you're like, as the outsider, you'd be like, oh, we'll just stop being so pessimistic and just like, just try it.
Yeah. It sounds like my mom a little bit. No, just kidding. I love my mom, but that does sound like, get over it, Molly. People get sad.
Yeah. And I give up. So like, I immediately think about like how hard things are going to be. And like, it just like weighs me
like
down.
How am I never going to have a piece of chocolate cake again? I'm there.
And what I've come to recognize is like a lot of that pessimism is a coping habit or strategy that we've used to help protect us against our own unrealistic optimism.
Wow.
That if someone says to you like, hey, I know you've been struggling with your weight your whole life, but just, this is my 30-day secret challenge. And like the pharmaceutical companies don't know about it. And like, I'm the only one who has this method. And like there's a part of your heart. And by the way, I say heart because really your limbic system, but the limbic system is intimately connected with all of your internal organs, which is why your emotions have great sensations in your body. You know, your stomach rumbling or your heart racing, like these are ways that we describe emotion. But you're like, oh, it could be that easy.
Right.
And then when it isn't, you experience that failure and disappointment in a much more crushing way because you sort of expected this and you got this.
Yeah.
And our happiness and a lot of this is based on the sort of the reward and learning circuitry in the brain in the nucleus accumbens, isn't so much based on like the good or bad things that happen to us, but rather the difference between your expectation and what happened. So if you expect things to be amazing and they're just like pretty good, you're disappointed. If you expect things to be terrible and they're just kind of like, okay, you sort of experience that as a positive. So if you think, oh, I'm going to lose 30 pounds on this diet and you lose 10 pounds, like maybe you'd be really disappointed. If you said, oh, this is not going to work, nothing's ever going to work, but you finally try it and you lose 5 pounds, like, oh, you're really happy.
But isn't there something to say that when you walk into something, like I always have this idea, like, you know, if a Olympic athlete goes into a event saying, if I get fifth place, that'll be okay. That it's likely they're not, they're definitely not going to get the gold, right?
Yeah.
So isn't there something to say that when you're downplaying success, that it's likely you won't achieve it? Like, where does that come in?
So yeah, that's a great point. And it has to do with,
I mean, can we just say I am in the compassion mode? Like, this is so like, no wonder that like, can everyone just pat themselves on the back, give themselves a hug? Like, this thing complicated. We're going to get to the bottom of it, but this is complicated. Okay. So tell me why I can't say fifth place and I need to go for the gold.
Here's the difference between you and an Olympic athlete is that an Olympic athlete has a high sense of self-efficacy in knowing that like, oh, I know exactly what I need to do. And I have extreme confidence in my ability to do it. And so that is a very different situation than someone who's like, I have no idea what I'm supposed to do, or like, I know exactly what I'm supposed to do, but I have no confidence in myself, in my ability to do it. And if you are in either of those categories, then just telling yourself about, no, but it's really important that I win the gold. Well, that all that succeeds is stressing you out and creating anxiety, which just drives you back to your habits.
Yep.
And so that's one of the things that like most people don't understand is that like goals, like people know that goals are helpful, but like goals are only helpful if they, like you can have a goal that you're not sure if you can reach if it inspires you. Sure, perfectly.
Such an important point. Not if it scares you, because if it scares you, you're back in the old snow groove.
Exactly. So if a goal is inspiring, like I want to make the Olympics. Like I have a friend who he has like shared, dual citizenship with like Lithuania, and he was like, I figured out like the best I could make it to the Olympics. He's like 40. He's like, if I could make it to the Olympics, if I try in archery, because that's something you can learn later in life. And so like, that's inspiring. Like maybe he's not going to do it, but like, that's inspiring and motivating for him.
But he'll like die trying. It won't impact his life. It's going to be a really funny and great thing. It's not like somebody scrolling Instagram, feeling terrible about themselves, sees this diet that says, well, you just have to do 8,000 things and and then and they're like, there's no way I can do this.
And like role models are another example, like seeing these people on Instagram. Well, do they inspire you to feel good about yourself and feel like, oh, I can just do that and follow them and they're like me and blah, blah, blah. Then.
Or do they side shame you like most diets?
Exactly. And so realizing like, oh, like, yes, in theory, goals are good, but goals, like a lot of different sort of interventions that we can do are just tools. And there's no tool that is perfect in every single situation. Like a hammer is a very useful tool, but there are many situations where, if you're trying to paint, like you're just going to put holes in the drywall with a hammer.
No,
like,
but I like this idea of goals.
Such a terrible goal.
Goals that make us feel good. Like I say this thing around New Year's Day where I say, don't make a goal that's just going to become on a not done list. Like, I've never really heard it in this way, which is make goals that inspire you, or make goals that make you think you can do them. I mean, that's just a basics of behavior.
But so there are two, but again, like, thinking like, oh, I want to make it to the Olympics. Like it's perfectly fine to have a goal that you're not sure if you can do, if you doubt that you're going to do, if it inspires like positive emotions. And if it doesn't, then screw it. Like stop thinking about it. Instead, just focus on the short term. Like, okay, what are the simple, like dumb little things that you have total control over that you can just put on your to-do list, and you have high confidence that you could do them. And those aren't inspiring goals. And this is where we get stuck. And this is where our emotions sometimes get in the way. If it's like, okay, well, don't buy cookies at the supermarket or whatever.
That's like a big deal for a lot of people.
Yeah.
That's a perfectly small, beautiful goal. I'm in love with that goal.
When actually, so I just a related story. Like when I first started buying groceries for myself in college, like I was like, oh, you just, you walk down the aisle and, oh, you see, oh, I need this. And like the first time I went to the supermarket with my girlfriend, she was like, why are you walking down that aisle? Like there's nothing you need there. It's just like cookies and candy. And I was like, oh, I don't know. It's because they walk down every aisle. And like, I had this like flashbulb moment about like, oh, like if you have cookies, like I have a problem. Like if there's cookies in my house, like I'll just eat them.
Yes, I
like
hear
particularly
that.
those like ones like with the different frosted, like that they sell at supermarkets that.
Sure.
And I realized like, oh, like because our reward circuitry and our habit circuitry works on this sort of stimulus response way, like if you see something, like you're walking down the aisle and you're like, oh, there it is. Like you're much more likely to grab it. Even if you're not like, you can consciously intervene, but it takes willpower and awareness. And the further you intervene in the process, the easier it is. Like it's easier to avoid temptation than to resist it, is what I say. So
that is
like,
did you make that up? That is like, that's a quotable. It's easier to avoid temptation than to resist temptation. I need to lay on that for a minute.
So like,
thank you.
If you're,
but I think people like it's like people think they're maybe not stronger than they are, but people think that they have more willpower than they do of the 15 minutes we get in a day.
Right.
And it's like, it wouldn't occur to somebody to say, oh, maybe I just don't get to, I always say to people in the beginning, order your groceries online. So you don't even have to go to the supermarket.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, cause it's very likely that you're going to go down that old snow groove and have cookies and then you're going to eat them. And it's not
particularly
personal.
If you have like a problem of like going down that snow groove and you have some, problem food that you can't resist, like, well, when you get cues, like visual cues that you're moving closer to a reward, you release a little bit of dopamine in the nucleus accumbens that is both rewarding and motivating. It pushes you closer to get that bigger reward. So you walk into the supermarket and you're like, oh, there's a cookie aisle.
Sure.
And that like motivates you to like, oh, notice, oh, there's a cookie aisle. And that motivates you
now.
to walk down it. And then then you see and that motivates you to buy it. And like all in anticipation of getting it. But the irony is that like the more that you sort of use these impulses and these bad habits to deal with stress instead of like actually just dealing with the stress in your life in more productive ways, you stop. Like this is how it transfers from the sort of what I talked about in that problem drinker study. It's how it transfers from being this like, oh, enjoyable thing, like, oh, I enjoy eating cookies, to, oh, this is just something that I have to do to avoid feeling worse. And I don't actually even enjoy it, but if I don't do it, I'll feel worse. And then the reason why it's a particularly problematic habit is when, if stress triggers the habit and that it only sort of gets rid of the stress for just a moment, but causes more problems down the road where you're like craving more sugar, or you're not losing weight, and then you feel worse about yourself and you feel stressed, and then that prompts you to go in your unhelpful habit. And that's where you're really stuck, because you're not enjoying the habit and it causes problems in your life that make it more likely that you'll do that. And that's the downward spiral.
That's the downward spiral. So, okay. I promised you I wouldn't ask the questions that everybody asks, but I need to ask the question that everybody asks, because we're like, coming towards the goal line. Can you tell me? Because we're samesies in a lot of ways. The other ways we're samesies is I'm like, stop talking about it, start doing something, right? Action is like 10 years of therapy. That's what I like to, when somebody does something really actionable, I was like, well, that was 5.5 years of therapy just by saying no to that. Good things. Mm-hmm. So you're an action guy. Can you talk us through a bunch of actions I think everybody should buy this book.
Thank you. Yeah,
it's a must read. But if you could just give us a little,
upward spiral,
I'm here for it.
Yeah.
I love this book. But I think if you could just give us just a little whetting of the appetite, pun intended, of things that we could do like right now, including buy your book, but like to get us in this upwards, to move from downward to upward spiral. What would you say?
One of the things that I think is part of the problem is people are always so focused on the problem, the immediate problem that they have, instead of just like the bigger picture. Because like what I like, the reason I say that is like a lot of times, you know, the issue is triggered by our emotions. And instead of focusing on like the eating, we'll just do all these other aspects, other things in your life that help your brain better regulate your emotions.
Like what?
Like improving your sleep patterns. One simple way is just like, try having like a calming sleep routine that sort of ends with you going to bed around the same time every night. Like don't do work in bed or stress out about stuff like before bedtime. Just, you know, read a book, take a shower.
What is that? How does that help us getting in an upward spiral?
And so because
I really like to watch TV before bed, so I always need a good sales pitch as to why I should.
So it actually is fine for you to watch TV. People are always like, "Oh, you're telling me I can't do this?" Like you don't have to do any of this stuff. Like, but if you have a problem that improving the quality of your sleep could improve, well, then maybe you should be curious to see like, I wonder if just sleeping a little bit better would help. Going to bed at the same time, for one, allows us to take advantage of our brain's release of melatonin. Your brain releases this chemical melatonin when it about half an hour before it thinks you're going to go to sleep. And if you go to sleep at that time, your sleep is more restful and restorative than if you went to sleep earlier or later. So people are always focused on like, I need more sleep or whatever. Like, no, it's actually better to get 6 or 7 hours of like consistent sleep, going to bed at the same time, waking up at the same time, than it is to get 8 hours or 8.5 hours of inconsistent sleep where, sometimes I go to sleep at 2, sometimes I go to sleep at 10, sometimes I'll sleep for 12 hours. Like just the consistency of that helps you take advantage of melatonin release and helps you get better quality sleep, which improves your mood the following day and reduces stress. And because it helps strengthen the functioning of the prefrontal cortex, it better enables the prefrontal cortex to sort of override these unhelpful habits.
It's really starting to take care of your brain. I mean, it's such an interesting thing, you know, like making goals that make you feel good, starting to really take care of your brain, and sleep is, you know, the most important thing for your brain.
The simplest things you can do for sleep are like, okay, try to go to sleep around the same time every night. Try to get bright lights in the morning and during the day, because that sets your brain clock, your circadian rhythms to know like, it's morning, it's 7 a.m. Okay, bright lights, get some bright light during the day. And then, in the hour or two before sleep, try to not have like all the lights on in your house, because then that enhances the melatonin release at the right time.
I'm obsessed with sleep. The other thing I'm obsessed with, and I don't know, I read the book really quickly, but I'm also obsessed with connection. Is there research on that and getting in an upward spiral?
Oh, definitely. Like,
really? I'm doing it right. I'm very rarely doing it right, but I'm in this moment, I'm working on sleep and connection. So go.
So like we, humans are successful as a species. Like, we have big brains, but like our big brains are only successful because like we're able to work and connect with other people. Like if you just think about early humans, like how unlikely is it like we survived? Like just compare yourself to any other animal.
It's
like
amazing.
A squirrel. Like who do you think would do better in the wilderness? Like you were a squirrel, like,
or a lion, forget it.
Right. Or a lion or cow. At least a cow has like, thick leather.
Right. It's amazing.
We're like thin skinned, no run that fast. Like we don't have sharp teeth. What we can do is like work really well together. And our brains evolved to make us do that by utilizing two functions that are already evolved for other purposes. One is to make it really enjoyable and rewarding to be connected with other people by using the same reward circuitry that we use for, eating food.
Wow.
The other is to make it really scary and stressful to experience isolation or social rejection. And that uses the pain circuitry, like actually the same brain regions that activate for physical pain also activate for social rejection. And by oftentimes when people are feeling stress, like, well, the simpler thing to do is like, well, just eat a cookie or eat some ice cream, because that's going to activate your reward circuitry. It's going to activate a lot of, maybe memories and associations of like closeness that you're missing out on. And like, that's the easier way to sort of get a little boost of that. It just is not actually what you are craving, which is a deeper social connection and acceptance with other people.
That is always the question I ask on the, you just answered the question I always ask, that we're always craving that. Yeah.
And one of the best scientific articles I read about that was it looked at people with like morbid obesity and like going through this medical process of like losing all this weight, and 70% of the people gain back the 200 pounds they just lost. And the scientists like looked at the question in a way that most scientists don't, which is instead of saying like, why are these people doing these things that are so obviously bad for them? Instead to think like, oh, like in what way is it benefiting them that they keep doing it, even though it's causing all these problems? And while scientific studies are not known usually for like good quotables, but this one sort of identified something I thought was really powerful. They found that the two biggest predictors of whether people gain the weight back was like childhood trauma, I think, or a current abusive relationship.
Sure, yeah.
And the thing that they said was that like, you can never it's very hard to get enough of something that is almost the right thing. And that really stuck out with me because like, oh, the actual problem is like self-criticism and loathing and fear that I'm unloved or unlovable or not feeling connection. But like addressing that, very difficult and scary.
Yeah.
Much easier to just, oh, well, then it's just eat a cookie. Yeah. And it doesn't quite, it doesn't address the actual problem, but it kind of approximates some of the dopamine bursts and some of the endorphins and some of the oxytocin, in fact, involved in all of that. And it's sort of like, it's close enough that if you squint, like you kind of, can equate the two. And that is actually, by the way, perfectly fine. It is perfectly fine to comfort yourself with food. The only problem comes when that is your only source of comfort, your primary source of comfort. Because sometimes, like I've had this notion, like when I sort of realized this, like, oh, I shouldn't, I'm really stressed about work. I shouldn't, eat some ice cream to comfort myself. And like, it's totally fine as like one of many tools. Just like it would be perfectly fine to drink a beer after a particularly hard day at work.
If you're doing it socially or one-off. That's right. I love that.
It is when it is the balance. We should ideally trying to achieve a balance and understand, why am I doing this? Oh, I'm doing this just because it helps me feel good for a moment. But I have enough other healthy, positive coping habits to also fall back on that I don't get stuck and addicted to this one.
It's such a good thing.
That is an important thing to keep in mind.
I have one more question.
Yeah.
Because, my sickest self is just screaming at me. Bless her. Love you, girl. So we're talking so much about like these mini behaviors, and I want to get well now. I want to get well this minute, all of me right now. And you don't understand how much pain I'm in. And I think so many people stop and start these micro healthy behaviors because they think that they should have, like they start, breaking up a sugar or whatever, self-care, compassion. And they're like, I don't feel better yet.
Yeah.
And so, what do you know about research in that?
Well, like so one of the great articles, a couple of great articles that I like about that relate to exercise. Because it's the same problem in depression that I found people like, no, I want to get completely better right now.
This minute.
Like
by the end of this podcast.
Yeah. And like it's perfectly, reasonable to be motivated by the idea that you could get better quickly. Like to be motivated by the idea that I could win a gold medal. But like, if it doesn't
stop
happen,
binging my face off.
Right. But if it doesn't happen immediately or it's harder than you expected, well, then stop focusing on that goal if all it's doing is beating you over the head with your failures.
That's good.
Instead, focus on, what are the tiny little things that you can control?
Mm-hmm.
And
it's so hard to do that though, right? Like focusing on little wins is so culturally looked down upon, right?
But
it's
also people have a misunderstanding, I think, of what they can control and what they can't control. And that leads them to criticize themselves for things they don't have any control over. And it leads them to not take control over the things they do have control over.
Serenity prayer vibes. Yes.
That is exactly right. Like what you cannot control are your feelings, your moment to moment feelings. You can't control your cravings. You can't control whether us talking about food makes you want to crave food. Like that's how your brain works. Mm-hmm. You can't control the fact that you have a human brain. What you can control to some extent are what you then do with that information. Do you choose to use the fact that you had a craving as a reason to criticize yourself for being weak? Or do you use the fact that you had a craving to be like, oh, I had a craving and look at me, I'm not even doing anything about it.
Who's better than me?
Like,
Yahoo!
But because we have habits of like, oh, you have a craving and then you have a habit of like criticizing yourself and then you have a habit of giving up, like you've trained these habits. And if you can just break a tiny bit of that habit by like, well, maybe instead of criticizing yourself, you can reward yourself for saying, well, I didn't, I didn't act on that impulse.
I love that. And that's the difference between a downward spiral.
Exactly.
And an upward spiral.
And so that is like, people are like, well, I want to get to the top of the mountain
all
right away.
Yeah.
All that matters is like, well, what is the thing that you're going to change better than the default of what you're doing right now? It's like, are you climbing up the mountain or are you climbing down the mountain?
Yeah.
And if you're like, I want to climb up the mountain faster. Okay. Does that help you climb up the mountain faster? Or does that make you get in the way and you're just going to fall off the mountain?
Right. I also like, what's the alternative? This is going so slow. I said, what's the alternative?
Yeah.
Stopping it all. It's either going to go slow or we're going to stop it altogether.
Yeah.
Woo. This was every minute of this interview. I loved it. I appreciate you. I
appreciate you because I love like talking about this stuff. And I love how it like applies to so many different aspects.
Does it ever?
Of life. And the thing that I really want people to understand is that like just small changes are often the way to go, because like any big change in your life is going to create stress, and like that might create unpredictable, reactions and responses to that. Small changes are like a little bit easier to deal with, but even a small change in, giving yourself some sunlight, treating yourself with a tiny bit more compassion, like just skipping one impulse, any little change causes small changes in the brain. We can measure this, in your brain chemistry and your brain activity. And those small changes make further positive life changes more accessible.
Amazing.
And so if you're not there right now, that's fine. And being frustrated that you're not there right now, that's fine too. But that's just your old habit circuitry talking. And by continuing to make small positive changes, you can change your brain, and you always have that opportunity to create.
I also think finding a crew of people who are like down to make small positive changes with you, getting some positive peer culture around it is probably such a great idea too. Yeah. I'm bringing it to my Facebook group. I can tell you that.
No. That the like other people are extremely powerful, because one of our core motivators is like belong. To connect and to belong. And if the culture of the group of people that you are in is harmful and toxic to yourself, well, we have such a strong need to want to like belong. You're going to hurt yourself, when really what you should do is like, maybe I should find and connect to a different group of people. But because that creates so much fear about like, well, what if I can't connect? Like,
right.
Then it just drives us to our old habits.
I am changed by this. I am so grateful for you. We might have to do part 2.
Okay. Yeah. Well,
but
we have
today,
a lot
part 1, we nailed it.
Of stuff that we did not talk about, like gratitude.
We didn't even get there. I know.
For example.
I know. Yeah. So we might have to do a part 2. I'm pretty sure we're going to, but
wonderful.
This is a heck of a part 1. I'm grateful. Thank you so much for coming on the show today. You're amazing. And I hope everybody's buying your book. I hope that they've already pressed in their cart.
Thank you. Yeah. And there's a workbook
I saw that
for people that want a little bit more guidance. And then I
always want more.
My publisher was like, why don't you create a card deck? I was like, what do you mean a card deck?
Oh, yeah. Like, what? Just like I love a card deck.
And so they convinced me.
Little changes in a card deck. Oh, so I want all the things. So don't you worry about that. I want all the things. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show, and we'll see you for part 2. Stay tuned, everybody.
Wonderful. Thanks for having me.